The movie begins in a state-of-the-art penitentiary where they are experimenting with the effects of research chemicals. The test subjects, who are technically state inmates, are volunteers for this project in order to reduce their prison sentences. The program is supervised by the friendly and hospitable Steve Abnesti, along with his assistant Mark. Prisoners have their own rooms, carry out their tasks, and are free to move around without the supervision of guards. The subjects undergo daily tests with various drugs that alter their emotions and perception of the environment. Then we see a man named Ray, who volunteered to be a subject for a specific study. The man can't stop laughing. He's told a joke to trigger his laughter, and they even try to tell him about one of the world's greatest tragedies, but the man can't stop laughing. Steve sees him laughing and smiles because their experiment has proven to be a success. The next day, Steve approaches the Spiderhead Research Center. In the next scene, they are in a boat, with a blindfolded man sitting between the two scientists. The name of this prisoner is Jeff. Then we see Jeff entering a kitchen, where there's a woman with whom Jeff behaves as if he knows her. Both of them are criminals who have committed various crimes. Jeff acts strangely, speaking and looking at things differently, as if he has been influenced by something. Steve stands close to him, observing his movements and words, and he looks at a factory and expresses his liking for it. When Jeff is in his room, he reminisces about the good times when he was free, going to parties with his girlfriend, and life was beautiful. We then return to the laboratory, where Jeff is ready to be interviewed, and a woman enters and sits right in front of him. She has an attractive appearance, and Jeff can't take his eyes off her. When she is asked questions, Jeff rates her an 8 out of 10 for her attractiveness, but when it's her turn to evaluate, she doesn't even give him a 5. It seems they have been administered a love drug. They start to feel something, and their body language seems different. They begin to feel uncomfortable or overly comfortable. The two of them start to have feelings for each other. Therefore, the drug has positive results, as Steve observes, standing beside the two subjects. They become intimate, as both of them are unable to control themselves. However, the effects of the drugs they were given start to fade over time, and now the interesting part for the scientist begins. He wants to see if the two continue to act like lovebirds even after the effect has worn off. As Steve observes, they behave the same way in the following few days. After a while, though, the two no longer seem genuinely in love with each other. Now it's time for another experiment. Steve places a mobile pack on Jeff and tells him not to let anyone touch it, or he might have problems. In this experiment, they bring in another older woman named Sarah. She is given the same dose as Jeff and the previous woman, Heather. After talking with Sarah, Jeff ends up sleeping with her. Now he has slept with 2 different women while under the influence of the love drug. It's time for Steve to sit down next to him and make some observations. He asks if he should give one of the women some Darkenflox. What Darkenflox is will be revealed later. However, Jeff doesn't choose either woman. We then learn that the substance administered to the subjects is also known as M40, which could change the world significantly. They plan to use it to make people love each other. As Jeff is about to leave after the conversation, Steve asks him what he truly desires, and before Jeff can respond, the scene changes. We talked earlier about an accident, and now we learn that one of his friends died in that accident. And when asked what he truly wants, Jeff tells Steve that he wants to go back in time and fix what happened on that night. We then see him relaxing in the institution, and a guard approaches to call him inside. He is given a phone and hears a voicemail from his parents. His father tells him that this will be his last voicemail. Later, Christmas is approaching, and Jeff celebrates it a little early with Lizzie. The scene then shifts, and Jeff is back in his place, sitting in the same chair, but this time in front of a big man. Jeff is upset and refuses to have anything to do with the man. He goes outside, and there, he finds out that Sarah is asked the same questions as he was. He gets angry and starts screaming, but Steve tells him to be quiet, explaining that their life in this place is much easier than in actual prisons. Jeff realizes Steve is right and apologizes to him before agreeing with the doctor. That night, we see Steve behaving differently. He dances in the middle of the night, and it's evident from his actions that he has taken the same M40 medication. The next day, Jeff talks to Lizzie and tells her about Darkenflox. He says that if it is administered to someone, they will feel as if they are on fire, in fact, even worse than fire, from the way he behaves around Lizzie and talks to her. He seems attracted to her. Then we see Steve, asking his assistant to give him a double dose of one of the medications, but the man tells him to be careful, yet Steve orders him to continue. Meanwhile, Jeff arrives, and Steve asks him again about the women, inquiring whether they should give them Darkenflox, but Jeff again clearly states that he feels nothing for them. They give some Darkenflox to Heather while Steve watches. We see her behaving as if she is literally on fire. She can't stay still, and it's an emotional hell in her mind. Things start to get dangerous for the woman as she feels worse and worse, and we see her banging her head against the wall, throwing things around. When she hits her head against the wall, the situation worsens even more as Darkenflox is flooding her system. Heather ends up committing suicide while taking Darkenflox after she breaks her mobile pack, the device that administers the drugs. This makes Mark doubt their work, while Steve is shocked by this. As Steve rushes out of the projection room, he drops his keys. Jeff unlocks the compartment in Steve's office, only to find out there are no superiors, as the prison is run by Amnesty Pharmaceuticals. The drugs were named after a bingo card. Jeff learns that Steve didn't just plan to inject them with love drugs. In fact, he planned to conduct many more experiments on them. Steve, on the other hand, feels that something is not right and rushes back to where Jeff is, but he fails to put the key back in place in time. Steve then asks Jeff not to tell anyone about the unfortunate incident. This way, the authorities will shut down the unit. Jeff, however, is so shocked and upset by what just happened, but Steve manages to make him feel a little better about the experiments, explaining that they are doing everything to help humanity. Jeff feels better, and we see him and Steve talking about some funny incidents from the past and laughing heartily about them. It turns out they were using the laughter substance. Then we see Steve giving Darkenflox to Lizzie. She becomes strange and is frightened of a staple. While Steve watches her actions, it seems he is having fun while the girl is going through agony. Jeff and Lizzie are now getting closer to each other, and Jeff reveals to her, as they talk, that not only did he kill his friend in the car accident, but also his girlfriend. Lizzie hugs him and kisses him, telling him she understands his pain and trying to console him as much as she can. As Jeff and Lizzie spend more time together, it seems that they fall in love. Steve observes Jeff's feelings for Lizzie. Mark becomes skeptical of Steve's motives and gives in when confronted by Jeff. That evening, when Steve reveals to Jeff that Lizzie will be given Darkenflox today, Jeff gets immediately upset and tells him not to go through with it. Steve tells him to return to the laboratory the next morning, and they will start over. Mark comes to Jeff's room and reveals to Jeff all the things about Steve and his plans. He tells Jeff that Steve only cares about one drug, which is known as B6, the red drug. Sharing all this information with Jeff, Mark realizes he messed up. The next morning, Jeff returns to Steve. When Steve asks Jeff to administer Darkenflox to Lizzie, Jeff takes control over Steve. Steve's mobile pack forces him to acknowledge that the program's true purpose is to test the compliance drug B6. The other drugs are just side projects, used to subject B6 to the ultimate test, to see if it would or wouldn't harm their loved ones when ordered. All the time the inmates consented to various tests, they were actually under the influence of the compliance drug. Furthermore, Steve informs Jeff that he had actually finished his sentence 7 months ago, while Liz's release appeal had passed the previous week. Jeff forces Steve to open the door at the main entrance to release Lizzie, and then tries to order him to give him the knife. Steve resists and instead takes Jeff's phone and activates all 4 vials of Darkenflox from Liz's mobile pack, causing her to behave hysterically and attempt suicide. The two struggle for control, and Jeff manages to disarm Steve, damaging his mobile pack in the process. Jeff rushes to save Lizzie. He manages to remove the Darkenflox vials and tells her he loves her, but Steve gets up and orders the other inmates to apprehend Jeff and Lizzie. They manage to escape Spiderhead after defeating some of the other inmates and locking the main door behind them. Mark and the police are now approaching the island, while Steve escapes in his seaplane, but crashes joyfully into a mountain. Meanwhile, Jeff and Lizzie take the remaining motorboat and manage to escape.